Let's take some money from Vegas. There's some value to be captured in these opening odds for over-under win totals for the 2025 college football season. I dove into all the lines, which you can't bet on every single team right now, but there's 5 that stick out to me. Let's get into it. The first one, and this had the biggest sticker shock of all the lines, it's Vanderbilt. And when I saw their opening odds at 3 wins, I literally had to fact check, like, am I missing something? Did they lose some huge critical piece that I'm not wary of? Like, this is the type of line that if Diego Pavia had graduated, this is where I think they would land. But the number one reason that this has a sticker shock is Diego Pavia is coming back. And this time of year, when you're projecting teams that are going to have success, one of the most important factors is, do you have a proven quarterback? And Diego Pavia is one of the best returning quarterbacks in college football. So that's the number one reason. The number 2 reason, look at their schedule. So in the month of September, they open up with Charleston Southern, Georgia State, and Utah State. I'm going to say right there that that's 3 wins. That would allow them to cover right away. But if you're a Vandy fan, you know that they lost to Georgia State last year. To me, that was more of a byproduct of the hangover effect, because Vandy had that huge win against a Virginia Tech team that people were super high on early on in the season. Again, was there a hangover effect element to this? I think this team's probably more mature next year. I don't expect that to happen. So you get those 3, I'll call them wins. They're going 2-1 at the very least with those 3 games. But let's say they go 3-0, then you just need 1 more win in SEC play. They also have Virginia Tech at a conference. Virginia Tech, like I just said, is a game that they won last year. Last year they were 7-6. You drop down to a win total of 3 as Vegas has it. To me, we're hammering the over for Vandy. Third reason I like this is scheme as well. So Clark Lea, their head coach, took over the defensive play calling last year for the first time. I think it's reasonable to expect that that defense could take another step. They improved on a points allowed per game basis, 36 points per game in 2023 down to 23 points per game in 2024. Does the familiarity with Clark Lea as their defensive play caller allow them to level up even more? Also offensively, and not just because of Pavia, but the fact that Vandy runs an option attack, that is incredibly difficult to prepare for if you are a opposing defense with 1 week to prepare for Vandy, which if you let that roll out a little bit, that's a recipe for upset alert if you catch one of these SEC teams sleeping. I don't expect him to have the Bama upset that they had last year necessarily. Like, that shocked the world, but it wouldn't surprise me if they sneak up on a middling SEC school. The number 2 line I love is the Texas Longhorns. We are hammering the over at 9.5 wins for a few reasons. The first is I trust my old head coach, Steve Sarkisian, and what he's done recently. 2023, they had 12 wins. 2024, they had 13 wins. Over under for the Longhorns coming in at 9.5. Where my brain went initially is Notre Dame, Ohio State, Penn State, and Oregon. They have an over under of 10.5. To me, I put Texas in that realm, in that category. So there's value right there in terms of getting 1 additional win compared to those 4 teams. The second reason is their schedule, and that's a good lead. And I just mentioned the Ohio State Buckeyes, but week 1, Texas goes to Columbus and plays Ohio State, which obviously, defending national champs, that's an out-of-conference game. That's not necessarily ideal for Texas's over-under win total. But I look at it a little bit differently. If you're going to play Ohio State, I'd rather play them week 1. Ohio State has tons of pieces to replace. I count 8 starters on defense they got to replace, tons of key starters that's well documented on offense, including some offensive line pieces too, which is tough to replace. Texas has similar offensive line concerns, but both those schools recruit well. But I just think all the pieces that Ohio State has to replace, 2 new coordinators that they have to break in, a brand new quarterback that they have to break in. And you could say, oh, well, Max, Texas has a new quarterback to break in as well. Well, we all know it's different. Arch Manning has a certain level of, hey, he's proven it so far on the big stage that you can't say about Ohio State and their new quarterback, that is. Obviously, the Buckeyes are national champs. Some other schedule notes, though. They play Arkansas and Texas A&M at home late in the season. At home, that's obvious. Why is late in the season important? I think Texas's depth, when you get them late in November, is tough for a school like Arkansas or like A&M, that their depth might drop off later on in the season. I think that works to the Longhorns' advantage. They get get Oklahoma on a neutral site, as we all know. And then you also get Kentucky, Mississippi State, and Vandy, which is 3 weaker SEC opponents. Another worthwhile point, Arch Manning. It would not surprise me if in December of this year, we are pounding the table and it's a consensus opinion that Arch Manning is the best quarterback in college football. So if that's the case, and you have a proven head coach, you've recruited at a high level, and on paper, you might have the best quarterback in college football, which I know is maybe getting ahead of myself, but it doesn't even feel that way, because Arch, we've seen it. I'm excited about his legs. I've seen what Quinn Ewers could do. I think Arch has even more talent than that. So it wouldn't surprise me if the offense levels up even more. And again, we're sitting here in February. You're projecting ahead, over under win total of 9.5. You got the quarterback, you got the head coach. I like that. Another point that's really interesting to me is Texas did not raid the portal. Their transfer portal ranking right now is not that strong. And initially it's like, oh, well, damn, that's a red flag. To me, I flip it the other way, because Texas has money. Texas has the ability to get guys in the transfer portal. They've shown that. Why would they not get into the portal? And to me, my initial reaction is, do they have confidence in the guys that are coming up next? Yes, they lose a lot to the draft. Yes, they lose, 2 receivers, some offensive line help, defensive tackles, but you didn't go hard in the portal. You have confidence in the guys coming up. That gives me confidence in hammering this line. The third line I like, and this is a bold one, I'm hammering the under on the Miami Hurricanes 8.5 total wins. This is a bold one, so if your first reaction's like, Max, you're absolutely out of your mind, because Miami does have the second highest odds to win the ACC. Keep an eye on this one in the coming months, because as Carson Beck and the reports about where his arm is, I'd imagine Miami might get even more transfers on their team in the portal this offseason. Keep an eye on this one, because I could see this getting up to 9.5, shoot, maybe even 10, and then I like the under even more. But here's where I'm at. The same 2 reasons I just said for Texas, the schedule and the quarterback. The schedule for Miami, they get Notre Dame and Florida as part of their out-of-conference schedule. They do not have easy outs in ACC play with Florida State, Louisville, Virginia Tech, and Pitt. Let me walk you through a hypothetical situation that, if you're a betting man, might be likely on paper. I don't know. We'll see how the Florida game goes. But there's a scenario where they open up with Notre Dame, they lose that. They win their next 2, and I believe the 4th game is Florida. What if they're 2-2 walking into a week 5 matchup with Florida State? The chatter and the temperature on Mario Cristobal's seat around him, I think, will heat up. I think it's harder than ever to control that chatter when you build your roster on the back of the transfer portal, and it's guys that you didn't necessarily grow up in the system with you and are expecting to be ACC champs, contending for CFP, and you find yourself potentially 2-2 with a rivalry game with a Florida State team that's pissed off from last season. I think the chatter could heat up on the Hurricanes potentially in a hurry this season, so keep your eye on that. Talking about the schedule, then the quarterback position. To me, Carson Beck, Miami went out and did what they had to do. I understand why Carson Beck was the top transfer portal quarterback in the market. I think it was a no-brainer for him to go to Miami and cash in on that payday. But Carson Beck is not a surefire thing for 2 reasons. One, his arm. I believe he has that same surgery that Brock Purdy had, and Brock Purdy rehabbed and got back, but that is not a surefire thing. And I know this transferring from USC to Pitt, especially as a college kid, getting acclimated to a new offense, a new program. He's not going to be in spring ball, and he has to just get thrown into the fire into fall camp. I know he's played a lot of football, but there's an acclimation period that's going to be tough for a quarterback like that. So, and I also think the football world got ahead of themselves in the evaluation of Carson Beck, basically the past calendar year, all of 2024. A lot of people had him as the number 1 quarterback going into last season as a NFL draft prospect. I never saw that on film, not because I don't think he has the skills, but he wasn't asked to do that in the Georgia system. He wasn't asked to do it the way that a Jaden Daniels or a Caleb Williams was. And then it's well documented that he struggled last year. I wonder where his confidence is at. Getting acclimated to a new roster, new play caller, didn't have a ton of success last year. Oh, by the way, I'm injured. Carson Beck to me is not a surefire thing. And oh, by the way, Cam Ward, he balled out last year. And I'd argue that he covered for a lot of the mistakes of that Miami roster. And I know they have a new coordinator and whatnot, but just the whole quarterback position, it's going to be delivered as a knock to Carson Beck. I also think it's a tip the cap to what Cam Ward was. Those give me concerns. New defensive coordinator for Miami, but keep an eye on the under 8.5 Miami Hurricanes. Number 4, I'm going the Michigan State Spartans. Similar reason to why I like the Texas line, because I believe in their head coach and I believe in what their quarterback can be and will be. I believe in Jonathan Smith and the jump that year 1 to year 2 that can happen with a new program. At Oregon State, his year 1 was 2-10, then it jumped to 5-7. He took over an Oregon State program that was atrocious. They went 1-11, 4-8, and 2-10 before he arrived. I believe in Jonathan Smith. I believe in Aiden Childs. And those of you that have watched my content closely, I have mentioned Aiden in several videos over the years. I know this past season was not great for him. 59% completion percentage, 2,400 yards, 13 TDs to 11 interceptions. I get that. I also remember the 2023 season. I called 3 Oregon State games. I don't know if I have ever talked to a head coach that was more excited about their young quarterback than Jonathan Smith was with Aiden Childs. Jonathan Smith has been around the quarterback position a lot. He coached Jake Browning and his growth for 3 years at the University of Washington and saw what Jake Browning was as a true freshman. And he spoke extremely highly of Aiden Childs. And it's why that when Jonathan Smith went to Michigan State, he plucked Aiden Childs and did not go with DJ Uiagalelei, which obviously that was proven to be the correct decision. I just think in year 2 for Aiden Childs, he's not the new guy on the block. It's not his first full year as a starter. It would not surprise me if he takes a significant step. I'm not going to sit here saying, oh, he'll be one of the best quarterbacks in the country next year. Wouldn't surprise me if he started getting into that top 10 conversation, but I expect his numbers to be a lot more productive. This was a offense last year, rushing offense that was 74th in the country at only 145 yards per game. Jonathan Smith wants to be a rushing offense. I think that number gets better. Their defense was good last year, 26th in the country in yards allowed per game. So the over-under is 4.5. They won 5 games last year. So if they take another step, well, then that's more than 5 wins. They have winnable home games against a Western Michigan, Boston College, Youngstown State, UCLA, and Maryland. And then can you get one more? Can you pluck off one from an at Minnesota, at Indiana, at Iowa? They also have USC, Nebraska, and Penn State. I just think, obviously, I just rattled through those 3 teams. Obviously, those 3 teams are tough. But 4.5, Michigan State, year 2, Jonathan Smith. I'm taking the over. Number 5, Virginia Tech. The over-under is 8.5. And check me on that because I think I saw some lines that were lower than this, which explains why I am taking the under on Virginia Tech 8.5. And the first reaction is, Max, you're taking the under on 2 noteworthy ACC teams. Like, how does that math out? It would not surprise me if the ACC is somewhat like the Big 12 next year, where you have just a lot of teams beating each other and a lot of teams late November that are sitting there with a couple losses, maybe 3 losses that are still in the conference championship hunt. I think Miller Moss at Louisville is interesting to me. I think Devin Brown at Cal, that offense, and Jaden Ott with Justin Wilcox's defense is interesting for me. I don't expect Florida State to be as bad as they were last year. You got a Georgia Tech squad that I think will still continue to be relevant, and it wouldn't surprise me if they even take another step. So the ACC could get interesting, but Virginia Tech, their schedule. So they open the season with South Carolina, and South Carolina is not what they were the past few years. South Carolina is here to win some ball games. They also got Vandy, like we talked about. So relatively tough out of conference schedule. They do avoid Clemson, but they have a sneaky ACC stretch late in October into November, a 5-week back-to-back stretch of Georgia Tech, Cal with Devin Brown, Jaden Ott, like I talked about, Louisville with Miller Moss, like I talked about, Florida State, and Miami. Not an easy stretch. Virginia Tech and their offensive and defensive coordinator drama the past couple months is concerning to me, or at least there's just a lot of unknowns there. Philip Montgomery, the new OC, took the seat of Tyler Bowen, who is now at Ohio State as their offensive line coach. For me, anytime that I see a guy who is a coordinator at an established Power 4 school that then chooses to take what is on paper a demotion as an offensive line coach, and I know he's the run game coordinator as well, and I know it's Ohio State, but every coach on the block wants to call plays. That's what Tyler Bowen was calling. And then he goes to Ohio State. I spent some time around him. I was impressed with how he handled himself. I thought he was a good coach. And it happened later on in the process. That to me is just unsettling. They get a new defensive coordinator as well. Chris Marv was fired. Sam Seifkis, hopefully I'm saying that right, is now in. Rushing defense that was not good last year. It was a secondary that was really good though. New coordinators, uncertainty there. You got a hot seat for Brent Pry. He's got to win and he's got to hit the over on this, I think, to probably keep his job. There's just coaching wise, a lot of uncertainty there. Don't love that. And back to the OC offensive situation. Philip Montgomery in. He has an air raid background. He was the offensive coordinator for RG3 at his Baylor days, coming from Tulsa. Montgomery is former head coach there. Why I'm bringing that up is Kyron Drones, who will probably be their starting quarterback. Pop Watson was the young guy they're excited about. Maybe he'll push Drones for playing time. Drones is the guy that on paper has everything. Big, strong, big arm, athletic, can run the whole deal. I don't know if he's an air raid quarterback because I don't know if he is polished enough in the intermediate passing game to get that done. Maybe air raid and the simplicity of those reads free him up. But from my perspective, last year, Virginia Tech, when they had Bayshal Tootin, who was one of the best running backs in the entire country, that's a quarterback's best friend. That was an offense that leaned on Tootin. The fact that you weren't able to have passing offense off of that or find success in the air off of that, that to me is concerning in terms of what Drones could be in 2025. The counter to that is, well, Max, maybe that's why Tyler Bowen was fired. Fair point. Again, just a lot of uncertainty offensive wise for me, and I touched on this, but there's just a hot seat for Brent Pry. It's just the reality of the situation, and having played for two coaches that got fired mid-season in my college career, I know that sometimes you can have talent, sometimes you can have great pieces, but if that chatter outside heats up, it can be really hard to, especially in the transfer portal era, get everyone going one direction. I got the under on Virginia Tech, but keep an eye on that because if that's at like 6.5, definitely don't like that. That's 7.5. 7.5, don't take this. But if you find that 8.5, maybe even 8, check out that under.